Hello everyone, this is my review of Sherlock Series 4, the first of a few Sherlock themed videos I've got planned for the next few weeks, just to follow on from Wholock and also Series 4 of Sherlock itself. So without further ado, here's what I thought of each of the 3 episodes in the series, and then the series overall as well. So the first episode, The Six Thatchers. Out of the 3, I feel this is the most traditional episode, to start with anyway, in that we are presented with cases that are akin to those seen in the first 2 series of Sherlock, and Lestrade and Scotland Yard have a bigger role to play in this episode than they do in the subsequent 2. The first half is very much focused on the case of the Six Thatchers, which I found hugely engaging from start to finish. In particular, I very much enjoyed the resolution to the first case of the episode, involving the death of that guy, the guy's son, who was supposedly in Tibet. After this, as many have noticed, the plot becomes much more James Bond in a way, stylistically, with more secrets emerging from Mary's past to threaten her and her, friends and family. Now looking back, it's clear to see what Mark Gatiss was going for, and Mary's eventual demise is hugely effective in highlighting the dangers of living life on the edge, in her case as a spy. In this respect, her character arc mirrors that of Clara Oswald in Doctor Who Series 9 really. Both characters suffer the inevitable consequences of that kind of choice of lifestyle. On first watch though, as impactful as Mary's death might have seemed, I couldn't help but feel a little cheated by how the resolution to Moriarty's unexpected return was delayed inexplicably and kind of just pushed aside a bit, because Sherlock in The Abominable Bride said that he knows exactly what Moriarty will do next, but in fact what he meant was that he knew that Moriarty was going to do something, but he wasn't exactly sure what. And then we see him in this episode just waiting for him to do this unknown thing, to make his next move. But putting that aside, however, on rewatch, The Six Thatchers is a very entertaining season opener and fantastic all-round piece of drama. And particularly having Mary's death in the first episode of the series certainly, sets us on the right track and basically sets up Series 4 as a very dark, dangerous and exciting series. Now moving on to episode 2, The Lying Detective. Now, oh my goodness, it is by far my favourite of Series 4. From Toby Smith's chilling portrayal of Culverton Smith, to the beautiful scenes that deal with coping with grief, to that game-changing cliffhanger, this episode is an absolute rollercoaster ride that delivers massive shocks and scares, just when you think things are slowing down. Watching this for the first time, it actually had me shaking with tension and excitement. As the second instalment of the series, I had anticipated it quite heavily, both as an episode in its own right, but also in regards to how it would set up the hugely secretive finale, and to what extent it would be leading up to it, particularly with the cliffhanger. Would there be a massive reveal in the cliffhanger that would kind of affect our whole understanding of what would happen in the series finale? In my opinion, this really is Sherlock at its best. It sort of starts off as another very traditional case, but very quickly the viewer realises that there will be more to the plot than meets the eye. In essence, the whole story, I figure, is about John, particularly the healing of his friendship with Sherlock, and him learning to cope with Mary's death. It's all about him coming to terms with his emotions, I suppose. Because of course Sherlock in this story is playing this long game, trying to trick John, and in doing so tricks the viewer as well. But it is revealed to just be a massive ploy, basically just to get him back on side, to save John Watson, as Mary has commanded him to. After the transmission of the opener, I had seen some fans claim that John is suddenly a much more unlikable character because of how easily he was led astray and had a sexting affair. However, I would argue that actually, out of all the characters, John has to deal with the most emotionally, in all 4 series really. If you take the death of his wife and Sherlock's behaviour towards him in this story, even though it turns out to be in his best interests, then you've also got him coping with Sherlock's death in Series 2, the Reichenbach Fall, and then after 2 years he suddenly comes back again, with finding Mary and becoming a father as well in this series, as the character that the audience is supposed to relate to, as the one that we're positioned with from the very start of the show. John does have to go through a lot of emotional trauma, I think. And yes, he's not perfect, but that is the whole point. I hate to use a cliched phrase here, but he is what he is. He constantly aspires to be better, and I think that's how all the best role models in fiction work. They have faults and fatal flaws. Yes, it was wrong of John to text Dee, but balanced against everything else that he's had to cope with, I think the viewer can't help but feel sorry for him. I certainly did. And then if you add to this the revelation that his therapist, someone who should be helping him to come to terms with his problems, then turns out to be to blame for some of them in the first place, I think what he overall has to emotionally face is just staggering. I really did hate Eurus at the end of that episode. I've watched that last scene many, many times because it was just so outstanding and unpredictable. But if you think about it, like I say, she is responsible for the whole thing with E on the bus. She was the woman on the bus. She was Faith setting up the whole trap for Sherlock in this episode as well. She's been playing a long game to get close to Sherlock and, leading up to the final problem. And John has had to kind of cope with some of the consequences of things that she's done in order to achieve that goal. And therefore I couldn't help but feel that she was a really evil character. Like I say, the Eurus reveal itself is just genius and something I didn't see coming at all. So much so that I literally struggled to get to grips with it long after watching, but in a good way. So here we are, welcome to the final problem. The series 4 finale was surely the most hyped episode of Sherlock ever, and so had a lot to live up to. Now looking back again, it's clear to see that Moriarty was never going to return properly, but nevertheless I couldn't help but feel slightly cheated by the whole build-up ever since the end of Series 3. For fans that saw it when it was broadcast, I didn't because I got into the show later on, but if you saw it in 2014, a whole 3 years ago, I'm sure you couldn't help but feel a little bit cheated by all the hype built up to his return, and it just turns out to be a flashback. However, that aside, this finale is an amazing piece of writing, and when you think about it, it makes perfect sense for Sherlock's final problem to be family related. We've had Moriarty and Magnuson, these supervillains, and Culverton Smith as well, and I think, to me, it just makes total sense for the final thing that Sherlock has to face, has to combat, being his own sister. There's something that's so kind of fitting about that, I think. It's like the sibling you don't get on with, the family squirrels that you had when you were a kid, coming back to haunt you now, but taken right to the extreme. I was absolutely blown away by Sian Brooke's performances across episodes 1 and 2, and this finale is no exception. Eurus is very much at the heart of the story, and Sian plays her brilliantly, at times making us really hate the character, and at others making her seem so helpless, innocent, and confused. I thought the plot was particularly genius in that it uses Eurus to represent, as Mary puts it, the desperate, unloved, and persecuted. Essentially, it highlights how easy it is for some people to fall by the wayside and potentially become dangerous. The thing I like about Eurus is that even though she appears so intimidating and unstoppable to start with, she's in fact a very vulnerable and confused character at heart. This makes her much more three-dimensional, and certainly to some extent relatable. But the plot also has another function. In the context of the whole series, this is the final step in Sherlock's development as a character and humanisation, as Moffat and Gatiss have stated. It therefore absolutely works to have it as the final problem, and perhaps the final episode of the show. There are a few plot holes and less plausible parts of the story, such as how Sherlock and John could be transported from Sherringford all the way back to the family home, or how John eventually got out of the well that he was chained to, but I think I can just about overlook those things, and instead appreciate the story for what it is, and the very relevant themes and ideas it explores. So overall, I found Sherlock Series 4 extremely entertaining, and, for most of the time, on top form. Personally, I would be very content with this being the last episode we ever get of the show, as I feel that most of the characters' arcs have been developed to a point where there isn't really much more you can do with them. Take John, for instance. Like I say, he's had to cope with the fake death of Sherlock, his subsequent resurrection, marrying Mary, becoming a father, watching her die, coping with her death, and then restoring his friendship with Sherlock. And in a way as well, his development has kind of come full circle. I don't think there's much more you could do with him. I certainly wouldn't want him to get another lover. Thinking logically, there are a few other experiences in my eyes that he could actually be faced with. Interesting enough experiences to make a story out of course. I wouldn't mind the odd special in the future, but a full-on 5th series wouldn't work. Another big bad would have to be created, and we've already had every possible type of villain I can think of. Any more stories would need to be standalone, and not see the return of any major foes, such as Eurus. A big part of me feels that the show should just be left as it is, with Sherlock and Dr. Watson's future adventures left to our imaginations. So thank you very much for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Sherlock Series 4 in the comments below, and I'll be back soon with more Sherlock videos. My next one is going to be a top 10 Sherlock episodes of all time, so I hope you can join me for that. Otherwise, again, thank you so much for watching, and bye for now.